Welcome to Sci-Fi Love Chronicles, where passion defies planets and hearts collide across galaxies. Here, love is never ordinary, it's otherworldly. What happens when a human doctor dreams of a man made of stardust? When a forbidden bond threatens the balance of the universe? When love becomes the catalyst for rebellion, evolution, and transcendence? This is not just a story. It's a journey into the unknown, filled with sensuality, danger, and cosmic desire. Stay with us until the end to uncover secrets you won't believe. What begins as a dream becomes something eternal. He came from the stars, but he touched her soul first. She never asked for dreams. Dr. Elara Myles had built her life on control. Precise scalpels, sterile gloves, blood pressure monitors. Her fingers had stitched arteries. Her eyes had watched. Pulses fade and return under cold blue light. She didn't allow the mess of feelings. She didn't need poetry. And yet, lately, when sleep finally came, it carried something with it. Someone. He came like a slow breath in the void. At first, she only saw his shape. Tall, lean, cloaked in stardust. Then came the details. Skin like liquid metal, hair dark and shimmering like wet obsidian. And those eyes the color of forgotten galaxies. Not just violet, but infinite. Like they had seen the birth of stars and still longed for something more. He never walked. He drifted, like gravity barely touched him. He never spoke out loud. But she heard him, or felt him, whispering her name like it was an ancient song. Elara. A gentle vibration in her chest. A pulse between her thighs. A tremble in her fingers that lingered long after she woke. Find me, before the others do. And then, silence. She would sit up in bed, chest heaving, hair clinging to her neck, her body aching with a need she didn't understand. A yearning that curled inside her like a secret flame. It wasn't just lust. It wasn't just curiosity. It was recognition. Some part of her, buried deep, already knew him. She tried to forget. But the dream followed her into waking life. It whispered through the heart monitors, flickered in the brainwave scans of her patients, symbols she had never seen, yet somehow understood. Delicate spirals, pulsing lines, coordinates burned into her memory. Her hands shook in surgery. She stopped trusting the mirror. And then came the night everything changed. It was 3:41 a.m. when the orbital hospital shook. An emergency alert shattered the quiet. Impact detected. Sector C, shuttle crash, unregistered vessel. Elara ran, heart pounding. Something inside her screamed, not fear, not duty, but knowing. She pushed past security. The shuttle was torn open, its hull blackened and smoking. The medics hesitated. Radiation warnings screamed. The air was thick with something strange, not heat, not fire, but static. Like the air before a lightning strike. And there he was, collapsed on the floor of the shuttle, limbs long and graceful, trembling. His chest rose unevenly. Blood trickled from a wound along his ribs, not red, but a deep indigo. Shimmer, glowing faintly like spilled starlight. She didn't breathe. She couldn't. Her knees hit the floor beside him. Her hands moved on their own, checking vitals, brushing hair from his face. Then her fingers reached the oxygen mask. She pulled it away, and time shattered. It was him, the man from her dreams. The voice in her head, the ache in her body, now real. Now breathing. His lashes fluttered. Those impossible violet eyes opened, locking onto hers. And though his lips didn't move, her mind bloomed with the sound of him. You came. Her throat tightened. Her body trembled. She didn't know what. This was, but it had already begun. He didn't speak, but she felt him, deep inside her. Kaelen lay still, his breath shallow but steady. The medical bay was quiet, bathed in low blue light. Machines whispered around him in soft tones, but Elara only heard one thing: the echo of her own heartbeat in her ears. She had cleared the room, said she needed time to assess. Truth was, she couldn't bear anyone else being near him. She stood there for minutes that stretched into hours, watching him, studying the smooth curve of his cheekbone, the way his chest rose and fell with a rhythm both familiar and foreign. His body looked human, but it wasn't. No scan could place his biology. No system could read him. And yet, her hands knew how to touch him. Her breath seemed to sync with his. It felt like gravity bent toward him. She moved closer. One trembling hand reached out, fingertips brushing against the warm skin just above his collarbone. The moment they touched, everything changed. It wasn't pain. It wasn't shock. It was a doorway opening. She gasped, staggered back, but the feeling didn't leave. A warm current rushed through her veins like electricity made of silk. It wasn't just in her fingers now. It bloomed behind her eyes, thrummed at the base of her spine, pulsed between her thighs. Then, a voice, not heard, felt. Elara. Her name in his mind, wrapped in light, caressing her from the inside out. She turned to him and found his eyes open, those deep, impossible eyes. He looked at her like he had been waiting for centuries, and when she spoke, her voice broke. You're real. His lips didn't move, but the thoughts that slipped into hers were liquid and warm. You found me. Across time, across stars. Her throat tightened. She took a step closer, drawn by something beyond logic. Who are you? She whispered. He blinked slowly, and when he sent the answer into her, it wasn't just words, it was sensation. She felt the icy cold of deep space, the roar of burning suns, the ache of exile, the pain of memories torn away, and underneath it all, a longing, so old, so quiet, so deep it made her knees weak. I am Kaelen, he said in her mind, and I have waited so long to find you. She couldn't look away, couldn't breathe. Her skin felt too small for her body. The room was suddenly too warm, too still. Why me? She whispered. Why? My dreams. Kaelen's gaze softened. He reached out, not with his hand but with his thoughts. A feather touch through her mind, a brush of memory. Her childhood. Laughter. The scar on her thigh. The night she cried in silence after losing a patient. He knew her. Because you are already part of me. Because the stars inside you are calling mine. Tears welled in her eyes. Not from fear, but from recognition. A part of her that had been asleep. Had woken, and it was hungry. His eyes closed again, but the connection remained. Even in rest, his presence sat heavy in the air. In her chest, between her legs, she touched her lips, then her heart. And for the first time in years, she felt full. Not complete, not yet, but opened. Kaelen wasn't human, but neither was what had awakened between them. It was older than species, older than science, and it had only just begun. When she touched him, she touched more than skin. She touched eternity. Elara couldn't stay away. Every hour she wasn't in that room felt like starvation. She tried to work, to focus, but her mind kept slipping. Back to him, to his breath. His voice inside her. The strange warmth that had spread through her body like a hidden fire, humming just beneath her skin. She came back that night. The lights were dimmed. The security systems looped. Only the quiet pulse of Kaelen's body filled the room. He was asleep. Or dreaming. His expression was peaceful, but his fingers twitched as if holding onto something far away. She stood at the edge of his bed, her breath shallow. "What are you?" she whispered into the dark, and as if in response, his presence reached for her again. Not a voice, not even words, just gravity. Pulling her closer, she sat down beside him. Her hand hovered over his chest, over that strange glowing skin, and then, slowly, almost reverently, she touched him. The moment her fingers pressed against his heart, everything around her disappeared. The room melted. She wasn't in the med bay anymore. She stood in space, barefoot, naked, wrapped in nothing but starlight and sound. Above her, twin suns, glowing soft gold and deep violet. Below her, a silver ocean that breathed like a living thing. And before her, Kaelen, not wounded, not broken. He stood tall, radiant, his body clothed in shimmering threads of energy. His eyes locked onto hers, not with surprise, but with knowing. "You came," he said, and this time she heard it aloud, rich, deep, velvet soft. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice trembling. He stepped closer. "Inside me." She felt it. The world around them wasn't real, but it wasn't fake either. It was his mind, his memory, his soul, and he had opened it. Only for her. Kaelen reached out, brushing a single fingertip along her cheek. The touch burned, not painfully, but like the first sip of wine on an empty stomach. Warm, sweet, dangerous. "You are the first," he whispered, "to enter without force." "How is this possible?" she breathed. Her body felt heavy and light at the same time, her skin hypersensitive, every nerve listening for more. He circled her slowly, eyes never leaving her, his voice low, almost reverent. "Because you dream of me. Because I've dreamed of you." Then, gently, he placed a hand on her lower back, and her body arched, helpless, into him. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't not, either. It was intimacy beyond skin, beyond language. She saw things then. Flashes, bursts, his childhood beneath purple skies, his first flight, his first fear, his exile, his loneliness, a silence that stretched across stars. And then, she saw herself. "You've seen me before," she said, breathless. "Always," he replied. "In every lifetime, in every version of the cosmos. I look for your eyes." Her heart cracked open. She didn't know what this was. Reincarnation, destiny, madness. But standing there, in the echoing soul of a stranger she felt more intimate with than any lover she'd ever had. She knew one thing. She didn't want to leave. But time moved differently inside his mind. She could feel her physical body starting to call her back. Distant alarms, fading lights. Kaelen's hand moved to her chest, just above her heart. "Next. Time," he whispered. "I'll show you everything." "Will I survive it?" she asked. He smiled, sad and sweet and sinful all at once. "That depends how willing you are to become something new." And with that, the stars shattered. She opened her eyes back in the med bay, drenched in sweat. Her hand still pressed to his chest, her pulse racing like thunder. Kaelen was still unconscious, but in her head, she heard one last whisper. "Soon, Elara. Soon we will burn together." And for the first time in her life, she wanted to burn. It wasn't just desire, it was evolution. Elara didn't tell anyone, not about the dream, not about the voice, not about how for the past 72 hours her own body had begun to feel alien. She stood in front of the mirror, fingers grazing the bare skin above her heart, and saw a faint shimmer, barely visible under the surface, like a constellation pulsing in slow rhythm beneath her collarbone. Her blood was warmer, her hearing sharper, her skin sensitive to light, to sound, to him. Every night, she returned to his room, and every night the connection grew stronger, even though he remained unconscious. But he was listening. She could feel it. Her dreams were no longer dreams. They were visits. Each time she closed her eyes, she found herself back in that endless starlit space, wrapped in the weightless heat of his presence. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he simply watched her. Sometimes he touched her, lightly, reverently, like her body was made of starfire and silk. She stopped fearing it. She started craving it. Then, on the fourth night, he woke. Not slowly. He sat up. The lights in the room flickered. Monitors spiked. Her own heartbeat nearly shorted the machine beside her. Kaelen opened his eyes and looked straight at her, fully, deeply, as if he were reading a book written across her skin. His voice came not into her ears, but straight into her blood. "You're changing." She didn't speak. Her breath was caught somewhere between disbelief and something hotter, thicker, lower. "What's happening to me?" she whispered. Kaelen stood, bare feet hitting the cold floor, glowing faintly in the soft light. He looked taller now, stronger, realer. His body wasn't just beautiful, it was designed to undo restraint. He stepped toward her. One hand lifted, not to touch her, but to hover inches from her chest. "The bond has begun. You allowed me into your mind. Now, your body remembers what it once was, and what it can become." "I didn't agree to change," she said, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. His eyes burned brighter, and so did her skin. "You didn't resist," he replied gently. "Not once." There was a silence, heavy, heated, magnetic. Then, Kaelen lowered his voice, a tone more sensual than any sound she'd ever heard. "There is a ritual, one our kind abandoned long ago. It merges not just mind and flesh, but essence." "Like a soul bond?" she asked. "No," he said. "More than that, a transformation." He stepped closer, barely a breath between them now. His body radiated heat. Her mouth went dry. "If we complete it, you will no longer be fully human. You will no longer be fully anything." Her throat was dry, her heart a thunderstorm. "What happens if I say no?" His gaze didn't waver. "Then I leave. I sever the link. And I will forget you." "But your body won't forget me. And neither will your soul." The air between them tightened, thick with heat, light, memory. Her skin itched for touch. Her breath stuttered. Every inch of her ached to be closer, not just to feel him, but to disappear into him. Elara reached up, slowly, fearlessly, and placed her hand on his bare chest. And this time, he gasped. She felt the way his body responded, not just his muscles, not just his heart, but his mind. He was trembling, just as much as she was. "Then show me," she said. "Show me what it means to become yours." This wasn't seduction. This was sacred. The room they chose wasn't a medical chamber. It wasn't even a room made for bodies. It was a containment vault, unused, sealed, soundless. No cameras, no alarms, just silence and shadow, and the faint hum of the station's core vibrating through the walls. Elara stood in the center, her heart trembling beneath her skin. She had shed her lab coat, her shoes, her armor. All that remained was breath and bare truth. Kaelen entered barefoot, silent. He didn't wear anything human. His body was cloaked in fine strands of light, like threads spun from a dying star. His skin shimmered silver blue, but where her hand had touched him days ago, a faint glow now pulsed, in time with her heartbeat. Their eyes met, and neither of them looked away. "There are no words for this," he said softly, mind to mind. "Only intention." "Then let mine be clear," Elara replied, stepping forward. "I'm not here to be saved, or possessed. I'm here to become." He reached out slowly, reverently, and placed both hands on either side of her face. The contact lit her nerves like fireflies under skin. Their foreheads touched, then their chests, then their breath, and then their minds. There was no light. There was no dark, only pulse and memory. Her thoughts opened like petals after rain, and he stepped inside, not to take, but to see. He saw the first time she felt alone. The first time she wanted to be held, but pretended she didn't. The moment she chose science over softness. The ache she buried in every patient she couldn't save. And in return, she saw his exile, the lovers he couldn't bond with, the agony of silence across galaxies, the unbearable weight of needing someone who didn't exist yet, until her. Their bodies moved slowly now, not like dancers, but like tides. She slid her palms across his chest, feeling not skin, but energy. Not warmth, but promise. He wrapped an arm around her back, pulled her against him, and their bodies locked like puzzle pieces forged in stars. There was no rush, no need to speak. Everything was already being said, in gasps, in tension, in the invisible glow building between them. Their breaths fell into rhythm. Her head tilted, his lips hovered, and when they kissed, it wasn't mouth to mouth, it was soul to soul. She moaned softly, not in pleasure, not in pain, but in release. The air grew warmer, the light dimmed, time stretched. Kaelen's hands traced her spine, memorizing each vertebra like sacred scripture. Her fingers tangled in his dark, glowing hair. Their skin pulsed where they touched, glowing softly, mapping the fusion point by point. Their minds swirled into one. No more Elara, no more Kaelen. Just a single nameless force vibrating across space. When the wave came, the final moment of merging, it wasn't a climax, it was a rebirth. Her spine arched. Her mouth opened. Her voice became his, and he cried out with her. Not in lust, but in surrender. They fell together, trembling, glowing, half human, half light. Breathless. Changed. Long moments passed. She lay in his arms, her head on his shoulder, sweat cooling on her skin. Her heartbeat was no longer alone. His was inside her, not metaphor, not poetry, real. "You are no longer what you were," Kaelen whispered, fingers brushing her hair. "Neither are you," she replied, voice soft, raw. He touched her lower back, then her ribs, then her lips. "Now," he said with awe, "we are something new." And deep inside her, in the space, between flesh and soul, she knew there was no going back, and she didn't want to. She woke up different, hungrier, brighter, more alive than human eyes could ever show. Elara woke up gasping, not from pain, but from too much sensation. The air itself felt alive, crawling over her skin like a whisper laced in static. Every molecule buzzed. Every surface glowed faintly, like her eyes could now see sound. The hum of the station was no longer background noise. It was a song, pulsing in harmonic waves through steel and light. Her body was still tangled with his. Warm, strong, silent. Kaelen slept beside her. Or perhaps meditated. His face was calm. But where their bodies touched, a faint glow still pulsed, rhythmic and tender. A soft aftershock from what they had done, what they had become. She sat up slowly, a sheet of golden light following the curve of her spine. Her breath caught in her throat. She touched her skin. It felt warmer, smoother, and yet almost too sensitive, like everything. Her pores, her pulse, her thoughts had been brought to the surface. "What are we now?" she whispered. Into the room. A presence stirred inside her. Not external, not invasive. Kaelen's voice echoing from within. Not just bonded, interwoven. "You carry my imprint now, my strength, my memory, my senses. And you, I carry your soul." She rose to her feet, bare, glowing faintly like moonlight wrapped in skin. The lights in the vault dimmed automatically as she moved. Her steps were soundless. Gravity seemed to pull softer beneath her. Her reflection shimmered in the dark surface of the vault's wall, her eyes now darker, tinged with violet, her pupils no longer round but faintly star-shaped. Beautiful, alien, herself, and more. But something else stirred. A whisper. Not his. Not hers. They know. A sharp pain bloomed behind her eyes. Her knees buckled. Visions flooded her mind in a surge of heat and static. Security teams rushing toward their location. Black-suited figures in command rooms. Neural scans of her, marked anomalous. A voice. "Terminate the subject if contact resumes." Elara stumbled back against the wall, her chest heaving. Kaelen opened his eyes instantly, and the connection surged between them like wildfire. "They're coming," she gasped. "They know I'm not just me anymore." Kaelen stood. His body moved like a shadow breaking free from starlight. "Then it's begun sooner than I hoped." "What has?" He stepped close, his voice low, filled with something between fear and reverence. "They fear what you've become. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's free." She looked down at her hands, still trembling. "I don't know if I can control this. It's too much." Kaelen gently took her wrist, guiding her palm to his chest. To the place where his pulse echoed in her now. "Then let me show you how." His touch grounded her. But inside, her thoughts spun like galaxies. She wasn't just a doctor anymore. She was a threshold, a weapon, a doorway. And behind that doorway, something ancient was waking. When they tried to cage her, she didn't run. She ignited. They didn't have time to dress. An alarm blared in the corridor. Short, sharp, urgent. Not a drill. Kaelen's fingers gripped Elara's waist as he pulled her behind him, his body still glowing faintly from the bond. She could feel his energy moving like liquid fire through the air, brushing against her skin in waves. "They're here," he said, "faster than expected." "How did they trace us?" "They didn't." His eyes darkened. "They traced you." Elara swallowed hard, still breathless from the shift in gravity within herself. "Because I'm not me anymore." Kaelen turned to her, his palm cradling her cheek. Gentle, anchoring. "No, you are more than you ever were, and that terrifies them." They moved through the silent corridors of the lower decks, where oxygen hissed and lights flickered with age. Her bare feet whispered against the metal floor, but she made no sound, no hesitation. Elara could feel the presence of the soldiers before they turned corners. She could taste their heartbeat in the air. She didn't understand it, but her body did. "Left," she said before Kaelen could speak. "Then down, third hatch. I can sense them." He smiled. "You're awakening." "It's loud," she breathed, pressing a hand to her temple. "Like hearing too many songs at once. My skin is humming. My blood feels hot. Kaelen stopped in the shadows and turned to her fully. Because you are starting to burn. With what? His gaze lowered. To her lips, to the hollow of her throat. With everything. The security team found them. Too fast. Too many. Shouts echoed. Boots thundered. Plasma guns charged. Stand down, Dr. Myles. You are under containment by order of Earth Interstellar Command. Kaelen stepped forward, shielding her with his body. But Elara didn't cower. Something in her snapped loose. Not broken, but unleashed. She stepped beside him. Her fingers splayed, her breath deepened, and her voice, when she spoke, was no longer just hers. You don't contain light, she said. You don't cage what was born to shine. The corridor exploded with brilliance. A pulse erupted from her chest, not fire, not sound, but raw, wild energy. Soldiers dropped their weapons, screamed, stumbled back as the metal walls rippled with force. Kaelen watched her in awe, not fear. Her body arched, her hair lifted from her shoulders, and her skin shimmered like the edge of a star. When the light faded, silence remained, and every soldier was unconscious on the floor. Elara fell, to her knees, panting. Her body trembled with aftershock, her veins still glowing faintly gold. Kaelen rushed to her side, catching her before she collapsed. You saved us, he whispered, brushing hair from her forehead. She looked up at him, pupils like twin novas, wide and burning. No, she whispered back. We saved us. They didn't stop to rest. They fled into the station's underbelly, no longer running from danger but towards something they didn't yet understand. Elara's hand found Kaelen's, in the dark, their fingers locking with magnetic certainty. They were no longer hiding who they were. They were becoming. He came to complete a mission, but he found a woman made of fire instead. They didn't stop running until gravity changed. A lower deck, rarely used. Once part of the old mining hangars. Quiet, hollow, still humming with memories of metal and ghosts. Kaelen placed his hand on the door. The scanner refused him. He didn't try again. Instead, he looked at it, and the door opened. Elara watched in silence, her breath still rough from the energy blast. Her hands shook, but it wasn't fear. It was awakening. He turned to her, eyes shadowed. You need to know why I'm really here. I thought I already knew, she said, voice dry. Dreams, destiny, cosmic longing, all that glowing poetic stuff. Kaelen smiled, but it was a sad smile. Not destiny, not longing, not at first. I was sent. Sent, he nodded. My kind. They detected something on Earth. An anomaly. A signature from the past. Ancient Aurelian energy. Something that shouldn't exist anymore. She frowned. Me? Not you. Something within you. He reached for her. Hand. She let him. His palm was cool, grounding, but his voice trembled. Thousands of years ago, before your kind could speak, Aurelians visited Earth, not to invade, not to rule, but to plant something. Plant? An idea. A code. A memory. A seed. In one woman. A genetic echo, meant to remain dormant until the universe called it awake. And now it has, she whispered. Kaelen's eyes flickered gold. Yes, in you. The code responded to me, to my presence, because you were the one chosen, or maybe the one who chose it. Elara felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from truth. She had always felt different, like her body wasn't fully her own, like something inside her waited. So I'm not human? You're more than human, he said, voice thick with emotion. You're a bridge between stars. Silence fell between them. But it wasn't empty. It was dense, pulsing with need, understanding, hunger. Kaelen stepped closer. The merge we began wasn't meant to happen. But it did, she said, her breath catching. And now, it can't be undone. He was so close now. She could feel his energy in her lungs, her skin, her blood. We can finish it, he said, voice dropping lower. Complete it. No more halves. No more waiting. What does that mean? She asked, but her body already knew. His hand slipped to the back of her neck, warm, firm, commanding. And she shivered. It means becoming one in every sense. Your mind, my essence, your desire, my fire. She didn't move away. She didn't want to. Will it hurt? She whispered. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. Only at first. Her fingers slid up his chest, tracing the glowing lines now pulsing brighter beneath his skin. She felt everything in him. The tension, the restraint, the storm barely held back. And after? She asked, voice trembling. He pressed his lips to her temple. After, you'll never be alone again. You'll hear my thoughts before I speak them. You'll feel my touch, even when we're light years apart. And if I say yes? She asked, eyes locked to his. Kaelen's voice dropped into something primal. Then I'll take you to the stars, from the inside out. Their lips met, no longer soft but urgent, and Elara opened, her mind, her body, her soul. She wasn't just surrendering. She was claiming him back, as if they'd once been torn apart and finally, the stars allowed them to fuse again. It was not lovemaking. It was the birth of a new species. The air in the room thickened, shimmering like heat rising from the edge of a dying star. Elara could barely breathe, not because of fear, not even lust, but because her body remembered. Something, deep inside her, older than language, older than Earth itself, whispered, "This is what you were made for." Kaelen's hands didn't rush. They hovered, studied, revered. His fingers traced along her jawline like he was mapping the edge of a forgotten constellation. His breath danced against her collarbone, and where it touched, stars bloomed beneath her skin. Elara moaned softly, not for pleasure, not yet, but because her very cells began to vibrate in harmony with his. They moved in silence. Clothing fell like leaves in zero gravity, drifting off their bodies in slow surrender. When her skin finally met his, chest to chest, pulse to pulse, a sound escaped both of them. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien. It was cosmic, a note sung only once in the creation of a universe. Kaelen lifted her as if gravity had no claim to either of them, his lips brushing down her throat, along her shoulder, across the curve of her breast. His mouth did not devour. It honored, and she, in return, let him see everything, not just flesh, but memory, emotion, fractures. "All of me," she whispered into his mind. "Take all of me." He entered her slowly, their bodies aligned like celestial bodies caught in perfect orbit, neither dominant, neither submissive, only surrendered, to each other, to light, to longing. Elara arched, not from pain, but from recognition. "You were inside me. Before this," she gasped. "In my dreams. In my blood." "I was waiting," Kaelen moaned, voice raw, "for your body to remember, the way your soul already did." Their rhythm was not fast. It was eternal. Each movement echoed across their minds like waves across galaxies. Her nails dragged down his back, leaving glowing trails. His mouth captured her cries like sacred hymns. No one led, no one followed. They danced between breaths and heartbeats, between lifetimes and light. Her climax came like a star being born, not sudden, not explosive, but slow, expansive, infinite, She cried out. But it wasn't a scream. It was acceptance. Kaelen held her as she trembled in his arms, their bodies still locked, breath tangling between mouths. "You are not just mine now," he whispered into her core. "You are part of something that cannot be named." And then he let go too. His body trembled, his voice fractured, and light poured out of him. Not metaphor, real light. White gold, laced with violet. It spilled from his eyes, his spine, his hands, and into her. She took it all. Their bodies stopped being two. They fused, and in that exact moment, they ceased to be human or Aurelian. They became new. They collapsed, glowing, shaking, smiling with tears. There was no shame, no confusion, no fear, only stillness and breath and unity. Later, as they lay naked beneath emergency blankets stolen from the lab, Elara traced the new constellation glowing faintly beneath Kaelen's ribs, the one shaped like the curve of her spine. "You're marked," she whispered. "So are you," he smiled, touching the base of her neck, where a spiral of violet. Light now lived in her skin, soft and warm. She looked into his eyes, her fingers brushing his cheek. "Are we still ourselves?" "We're more than we were," Kaelen murmured, pulling her close again. "And less alone than we've ever been." Outside, the world was still hunting them, but inside, wrapped in each other's light and heartbeat, they were untouchable. Somewhere in the galaxy, something ancient heard their union and stirred. Elara woke with her head on Kaelen's chest. His heartbeat was inside her now, not just metaphorically. She could hear it even when her ears were closed. Feel it in her bones. It beat in rhythm with hers, like twin suns dancing in lockstep across the night. But the peace was brief. They both felt it at the same time. A pressure. A pull. Like something had turned its eyes toward them from beyond the veil of stars. Kaelen sat up, eyes darkening like a moon being eclipsed. "They felt it," he said. "Who?" "The old ones. The origin caste. The Council of the Void. The ones who created the bond, and then forbade it." Elara sat up, wrapping a silver thermal sheet around her glowing shoulders. Why would they care? Kaelen turned toward her. There was no fear in his eyes, but something older, something wary. "Because we've done what hasn't been done in 10,000 years. We completed a sacred fusion outside their control." She swallowed, skin tingling. "Are they coming?" Kaelen looked toward the stars beyond the cracked window. No. They've already arrived. At the same moment, across the orbital station, alarms wailed, but not from Earth military. No language accompanied the sound, no code, no identification, just a vibration, deep and low, like the growl of a cosmic beast. Something was descending, something not of Earth, not even of Kaelen's time. "They've come to witness," he said, voice low. "Or to erase." Elara stood, fire building in her chest. "They won't take you from me." Kaelen turned slowly to face her, awe flickering across his expression. "No," he said softly. "They'll try to take us from ourselves." Outside, the space above the station fractured, like glass breaking across the surface of the stars, and through that fracture came light. Not a ship, a presence, older than words, heavier than gravity, vaster than death, a sentient anomaly. And it spoke. Directly into Elara's mind, not as a whisper but a command. "Daughter of fusion, child of fire, come forward, face judgment." Only the soul knows the truth when stripped of everything else. The air turned liquid, not literally, but Elara felt it, thickening, bending, warping around her as if the universe was folding itself inward. Kaelen tried to reach for her, but his hand passed through her shoulder like mist. His voice faded before it left his lips. She looked around. The station was gone. The metal, the walls, the cold. Now she stood barefoot on something that shimmered like obsidian glass beneath a violet sky with no stars, a world made of thoughts, a space that did not exist. Until she entered it. And then she heard them. Not with her ears, but inside her skin. Fusion was forbidden. Your kind was not meant to carry the light. You disrupted the balance. 3 voices, but 1 presence. They didn't appear. They simply were. A force, a pressure, a knowing. Elara stood taller. She wasn't naked, but clothed in the light that still pulsed faintly from her fusion with Kaelen. The symbol at her neck, the spiral of stars, shimmered as if breathing. "You summoned me," she said. "Then say what you mean." A pause. Then came the first test. A wave of emotion slammed into her, so powerful, so raw, it knocked her to her knees. It was fear, not hers. But the fear of every being who had ever touched the edge of the Aurelian bond and failed. She saw their faces, lovers torn apart, souls shattered, minds lost in endless dark. The ritual had consumed them, because they had tried to possess it. The voice spoke again. "Will you claim him? Will you make him yours?" Elara shook, heart pounding, tears sliding down her cheeks. "No," she said. "I will not claim him." We claimed each other. And with that, the fear vanished. Test. 2. A vision. Her past, her first patient, dying in her arms, her mother, leaving without goodbye. Kaelen's broken body on the hospital floor. The voice whispered, "Would you undo this pain if you could?" "No," she whispered. "Why?" "Because without pain, there is no opening. Without heartbreak, I would have never let him in." The sky flickered gold. The obsidian glass beneath her warmed. Final test. She felt Kaelen's voice in her chest, screaming. He was in pain, somewhere far or near. He was fading. "Elara." "They're taking me. I'm dissolving." She turned wildly, searching, but saw only sky. The voice grew darker. "You can return. Alone, safe, whole, or stay, burn, fade with him." Elara didn't hesitate. "Then let me burn." Light exploded from her body, from her chest, her mouth. Her soul, she screamed, but not in pain. In truth, she loved him, not as a man, but as a mirror to her own infinity. And when the light faded, she was kneeling again, back on the station. Kaelen beside her, eyes open, full of fire, their fingers intertwined. He was glowing. So was she. The bond had passed the judgment, and the voices spoke one final time. "Then so it is. We withdraw. You are the beginning." And just like that, they were gone. But something had shifted, not just in her, in the fabric of space itself. Elara wasn't just bonded now, she was anchored, a living threshold between species, between planes, between what was and what could be. And Kaelen. He looked at her like she was no longer his dream, but his reality. They didn't want a war. They wanted to be together. The galaxy had other plans. Elara hadn't stepped onto Earth in 5 years. But now, as the shuttle doors slid open and she felt gravity take her weight again, she realized she wasn't stepping onto Earth as a human anymore. She was stepping down as something else. Something the world wasn't ready to name. They tried to make it look diplomatic, clean hallways, gentle lighting. Representatives from Earth's Allied Council, flanked by delegates from the Vortari Alliance and other galactic coalitions, But underneath the pleasantries, there was fear. So much fear. Elara could smell it now, like static, like iron, like sweat, trapped in silk. Kaelen stood beside her, calm and silent, every inch a being of light wrapped in skin. His hand never left hers, and every step they took together sent a message across the cosmos. The bond is real, it works, and it changes everything. The questions came fast. Dr. Myles, are you still loyal to Earth? Is the Aurelian DNA influencing your free will? Are you weaponized? Are you still human? She didn't answer any of them. She just looked into the camera broadcasting to every inhabited system across the stars and said, I'm not your experiment, I'm not your prophecy, and I'm not your threat. I'm proof that two souls from two worlds can choose each other, without permission. That clip went viral in 47 languages. Some called her goddess, some called her traitor, some called her rebirth incarnate. The Vortari Alliance sent an encrypted offer, full sanctuary, political immunity, a private moon. The Earth allied. Command sent a demand. Submit for full neural scan and surrender Kaelen for containment. Kaelen's laugh echoed like thunder in a cathedral. They want to dissect what they can never comprehend. That night, they returned to the orbital station, where shadows felt safer than spotlights. Elara sat by the window, staring down at Earth. Kaelen stood behind her, and for the first time in days, the silence was tender. They won't stop, she whispered. No, he said. They'll try to turn us into a symbol. Yes. She turned slowly, her eyes reflecting starlight. Then let's choose what we stand for. Kaelen stepped closer, his chest bare, faintly glowing, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. Among my kind, he murmured, we don't propose with rings. We propose with memory. Memory? She whispered. He reached for her hand and pressed her palm to his heart. In a flash, she felt everything. His first vision of her, curled in sleep. His awe the first time her lips formed his name. His fear, when she touched his mind, and didn't flinch. His longing, raw, deep, scorching, when she opened to him in the ritual. His love, quiet, wide, unshakable. Tears slipped from her eyes. Kaelen looked down at her with a smile that almost broke her. Will you remember this life with me? He asked. Even if it's brief? Even if it costs everything? She nodded. I already am. And somewhere in the deeper layers of reality, the stars listened. They wanted love. What they sparked was revolution. The first riot broke out in the domed cities of Mars. A group of hybrid-born children, half human, half alien, painted Elara's face across a biodome wall with the words, she chose. So can we. Within hours, 22 colonies had declared their independence from Earth's interstellar law. Within days, they had a name, the Luminary Rebellion. Their manifesto, fusion is not forbidden, it is the future. Elara stood at the edge of the chaos, Kaelen's hand always near, always grounding. She didn't ask to be worshipped, she didn't ask to be feared. But her existence, her bond with Kaelen, was proof that barriers meant to divide had always been lies. Now, everyone wanted her, some to protect her, some to destroy her, some to be her. The pressure mounted. Kaelen began hearing whispers in the dream space, calls from forgotten beings, rogue factions, ancient souls long buried in the fabric of the galaxy. They spoke of the Merge Protocol, a final act, a permanent unification between bonded beings that could unlock dormant powers in both, but at a price. Once done, he told her quietly one night, holding her hand to his bare chest, "You'll never be human again. You'll never be alone again. You'll never be you again." She looked up, her fingers brushing the constellation-shaped mark now pulsing above his heart. Then maybe I've outgrown who I was. But the world wouldn't wait for their answer. A faction within Earth's own High Council called for neutralization, fearing that Elara's transformation would lead to an irreversible shift in genetic control. They ordered an attack. Not on her, on the rebels. Kaelen saw it coming before the sensors did. He woke in the middle of the night, his body pulsing like a beacon. "They're going to slaughter them," he said, voice cold with fury. "They want to make an example." Elara stood, already reaching for her suit, her hand sparking faint golden light. "Then let's be the example instead." They arrived on Mars during the first strike. The skies burned orange. Explosions shook the red soil. Children screamed. Elders chanted her name. Soldiers aimed their weapons, waiting for a command, and into the battlefield stepped Elara Myles, no longer just a doctor, no longer just a lover, but a being of light and will. She walked forward, bareheaded, eyes blazing, Kaelen beside her, his aura pulsing violet and white. Together they didn't attack. They amplified. Her presence lit the battlefield like a sunrise after centuries of night. Kaelen's mind reached out, touching every soldier, every drone, every frightened heart. And in a single shared thought he whispered, "Look at what fear has built. Now watch what love can burn down." The soldiers dropped their weapons, not because of force, but because truth had become unbearable to deny. That night, in the ruins of the battlefield-turned sanctuary, Elara lay beside Kaelen under the low Martian sky, her head on his chest, his hand tracing slow circles over the symbol at the base of her spine. "They want us to lead them," she whispered. "Then we lead," he said. "But not into war." He kissed her shoulder. "Into evolution." To save a future, they became more than lovers. They became a singular force. They stood at the edge of the galaxy. Not metaphorically. Kaelen had guided her to the fold, a rift in space where time bent like silk and light whispered like memory. "This is where the first merge happened," he said, voice hushed in awe. "Before history, before names." Elara reached out. The fold rippled, glowing in hues no human eye was ever meant to see. But hers had changed. Her everything had changed. "What happens when we step through?" she asked. Kaelen's gaze held her. "We become, entirely. All." Around them, factions waited, some in warships, some in orbit, some in prayer. The galaxy paused. Because everyone knew, if they stepped into the fold together, something ancient would be reborn. Not gods, but a new kind of existence. "You're not afraid?" Kaelen asked, his hand warm in hers. Elara smiled, her skin glowing like starlight drawn into a woman's shape. "I'm burning for this." He pulled her closer. No armor, no words, just breath, just truth. "Then say it," he whispered. "Let the stars hear you." She looked up into his eyes, no longer just violet but galaxies alive, and said, "I choose you. Across timelines, across species, across death and rebirth. You are not my other half. You are the mirror I step through, to become whole." They stepped into the fold and vanished. The sky split, but there was no sound, no blast, only light, like the universe exhaling for the first time in eons. And then, silence. Across the galaxy, those who felt the pulse fell to their knees. Some wept, some sang, some simply stared into space, knowing something greater had taken shape. Something beautiful. Later, when asked what happened to Elara and Kaelen, no one gave the same answer. Some said they became stars. Some said they ascended to a plane beyond flesh. Others claimed they hear their whispers in moments of stillness. But in the center of the fold, floating in eternal motion, is a shape. Two beings fused into one luminous entity, orbiting each other forever, pulsing in rhythm like a heartbeat across space, no longer bound by names, only by what they became together. Love is not limited by form, time, or fear. It is the only language the universe truly understands. And we spoke it. With everything we were. Elara and Kaelen echoes from the stars, the end. Or perhaps just the beginning. You've just witnessed a love that rewrote destiny. But the story doesn't end here. In this galaxy, every heartbeat echoes across time, and the stars are still listening. What would you sacrifice for a love that defies everything? Comment below. And if you haven't already, go back, watch every moment. The clues are written in light. This is Sci-Fi Love Chronicles, where love is more than a feeling. It's a force,